All right, let's start with your earliest childhood memories.
My first memories are living in Chalfont, Pennsylvania. My father was a newspaper editor at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and Chalfont was about an hour train ride for him every day. We lived on a gentleman's farm. We had about 10 acres with a large house on a hillside. And I remember in the winter we used to use the front yard for sledding. We left there when I was 5, so my those are really early memories.
And where did you go after you left there?
We went closer into the village of Chalfont. It was a small house, and we did that because my father's father, who lived with us and who helped maintain the property, he died. And so we needed to downsize. We moved to a modest little ranch house in a housing development. And that's where I started to go to elementary school and in Chalfont.
So you said your Dave's dad lived with you guys?
Yes.
What was his name?
His name, well, I don't remember off the top of my head what his name was.
Yeah, and what do you remember about him? Oh, Clancy's giving you a gift.
Oh, thank you, Clancy. What I remember about him, I have very few memories about him. I remember him being tall. Of course, I was short. I remember sitting at a table actually, and him feeding me. Oddly enough, that memory just jumped in my head, and I have my baby spoon at home, which is a little spoon with an orange plastic handle. And so that's a memory of my grandfather.
You still have that?
I do.
Wow, that's amazing.
I do.
And so then you guys moved into closer to town, into a more manageable
property, and there I had some formative friendships because of elementary school. I made friends. I was able to bicycle around the area. That's where I learned to bicycle. And one of my wonderful memories is that we sort of had this lot, which was made into a baseball field for the kids. And I remember my brother, who was 5 years older, teaching me to play baseball. And I became a regular on the team, even though I was a little girl.
You were on a baseball team?
Well, this was a boys' team, but it wasn't. You got together and say, "Hey, kids, we're going to play baseball this afternoon."
How old were you when this happened?
I probably was 8 or 9.
Okay, so
and I developed very good baseball skills. I had a good arm. I was a good catcher. I was a terrific hitter. That was fun.
And then how long did you live there?
We lived there until about 1955. This was between 1950 and 1955. And at that point, there was a new housing development going up, and my parents decided that they would buy property and build a split level house. And so we would ride our bikes over and watch the split level house being built. And actually, my brother Rick got a summer job working there and hauling lumber around, and we moved into that house in about 1956.
And how old were you?
I was 11.
Uh-huh.
And so I was able to go to the same schools because it was nearby. I started junior high school.
What kind of student were you?
I was an adequate student.
Why was that?
Because I was not particularly motivated to be a student. But it was there that I started to play my first instrument in middle school, and I played the flute. And my family had some music in it. My mother played the piano, and my older brother...
What was your mom's name?
Marge.
Yeah.
And my older brother Rick was very musically talented, and he was in high school at the time, and he played string instruments, bass. He played the bass, and he played trumpet and the sousaphone. And he was in the marching band, and then I got into the marching band because I was a flute player.
In high school?
In junior high school.
They had a marching band at your junior high school?
Well, we joined the high school marching band. We were
Oh,
all
okay.
a part of the
They were
community.
desperate for flute players.
They were desperate for flute players. And then in the summer, we had summer concerts on the lawn of the courthouse. It was an old courthouse, and there was summer concerts, and that's when I played in the summer concert with Rick. Even though he was 5 years older, that was kind of nice. That was very nice. I played the flute, and I loved John Philip Sousa music, and every time we would always have a vigorous Sousa piece in the summer concert.
Were you and Rick close?
No, because he was much older at that point. He was a teenager, and I was a kid.
Okay, then what happened?
Well, then the next significant thing was that my mother became ill, and it was a strange time because I was 12, and in those years, families weren't incorporated into discussion about a family illness. So she went off at Christmas time. She went off to Philadelphia to the hospital. Ooh. And she died in mid-February.
And you didn't see her between December and
I
February?
did. We would go in every week. But I had no idea how sick she was.
What was wrong with her?
She had a disease called dermatomyositis,
Uh-huh.
which is a deterioration of muscles. And there was no cure for it. But I had no idea.
And describe your mom? What was she like?
Ooh. I don't know that I can. I really don't know that I can.
Okay, so then your
Yeah.
mom, and how old was your mom when she died?
46.
Wow.
And
your
my
dad was
father-
still working
My
at the
father
Enquirer?
was still working, and my father was an interesting guy. He was disabled, and he didn't drive. And he was disabled to the point that he was dependent on my mother for his food and transportation and all that. She sort of she was a housewife, and she made sure that he got to his train and everything like that.
How did they meet? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't know. I happen to have some letters that they exchanged. I know that he lived in Cleveland and she lived in Chicago. And I have some letters from 1932 that they exchanged with each other.
And you still have those letters?
I do.
Do you remember anything about those letters?
Well, they're very lovey-dovey.
Wow.
They're very lovey-dovey.
And when was your dad born?
My dad was born in 1910 in Cleveland, Ohio.
So he would have been 22 at the time of the letters.
Yeah. And they were then got married shortly thereafter. They got married in 1932.
Uh-huh. How'd you go from Cleveland to Pennsylvania?
Well, it was my father's job. They were married in Cleveland. And there was a very close-knit group of Apples and Kleins that lived in Cleveland, in Shaker Heights and in Cleveland Heights. But my father was a newspaper man, and he got a job offer in Chicago. I wasn't born yet. And they moved to Chicago in about 1942 or 43. And I was born in Chicago, and he worked for the Chicago News. And then after I was born in 1945, he got a job in Philadelphia. Each time it was a sort of a step up. And he became the features editor, the book editor in Philadelphia. And he moved to Philadelphia, and my mother and my brother and I moved about 6 months later.
So he left before you.
He left before us. He had to start his job.
Did you talk about his job?
I knew about his job because I have very strong memories of visiting him in Philadelphia. We would go to his office, and we would go down to the press room, and it was typically on a Friday afternoon that we would do this. And at the time, newspapers were printed by linotype machines, which was a melted lead, a machine in which lead was melted into blocks which had letter characters on them. And I can remember the noise, the incredible noise, because there might have been 50 or 60 linotype machines in this one room, and clamoring, and the noise and the smell and the linotype machines. It was pretty exciting.
And then, what happens after your mom dies?
Well, it was a confusing time. My father really had never been a hands-on father, and he didn't quite know what to do, so he hired a series of housekeepers that didn't last very long to sort of stay with us because of his long hours. He tried learning how to drive a car, which was kind of a disaster. And within 2 years, we moved to be in Philadelphia so that he could be near his job, and Rick was going off to college at that point.
Where did Rick go to college?
Rick went to Swarthmore College.
Okay.
Which was near Philadelphia. So we moved to a very large apartment in the Germantown section of Philadelphia, and I was enrolled in a school on the other side of the city, a private school.
How was it moving to Philadelphia? How did you handle that?
My memory of that is that my father, once again, didn't know how to do that kind of thing. And I remember the day before we were to move and the moving truck was coming, we had very dear friends who came over, the Silvermans, and Annie Silverman wrapped up packaging, and she was packing things, and then we got into everything was loaded the next day into the moving van, and we moved to Philadelphia. It was pretty traumatic for me because I had left all my friends and where I grew up, and I was now in an apartment in a city that I did not know.
And what grade were you in?
I was going into 9th grade.
So then you started 9th grade. Was it hard to make new friends, or how did that go?
It was very hard to make new friends. It was very hard. That's FedEx. That's not Amazon. Thought for a moment it was Amazon.
Okay.
Oh, that's something else. Tyler.
Of course. So you're now in Philadelphia.
I'm in Philadelphia, and I went to a school called Friends Central,
Uh-huh.
which was not easy to get to because it was on the opposite side of the city, but that was the school my father was familiar with.
And how did you get there?
I took 3 buses, and it took me an hour and a half there and an hour and a half home.
It took you an hour and a half to get to high school?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And it took me a couple of years before I really felt comfortable there and made friends there. But I was active in the school, and I played. We had required sports teams.
Yeah.
And so I played baseball and hockey, field hockey in the fall, baseball in the winter, and softball in the spring.
Were you still playing flute?
I played flute only for a little bit at that point, and then I stopped it because I didn't have time for it. So the other thing that started when I turned 15, the summer I guess I turned 16, my father was appropriately concerned that I was just spending the summer in an apartment in Philadelphia, and he sent me to spend the summer with his brother, Pete.
And how old were you?
I was 16.
Wow.
And I went to California for the summer.
And how was that?
Well, that was fun because it was fun for Pete too, because he and his wife Betty were then able to go out and enjoy themselves, and I was the babysitter for my 3 cousins. So I worked at his as a pharmacy girl, where he was a pharmacist in Anaheim.
Uh-huh.
And I did that for 2 summers.
Oh, you did 2 summers back to back?
Actually, I was 17, and the summer I turned 18. That's right, because it was a summer before college that I was there. So I was there 2 summers.
And you had a good time? Did you ever go to Disneyland?
Oh, we went to Disneyland regularly.
Really?
Yeah. And I worked across the street from Disneyland, and every night I knew it was time that we were closing because we could hear the fireworks at 9 o'clock. And we would leave and see the fireworks across the road at Disneyland.
So then
Then I started college.
where'd you go to college?
I started a place called Wilson College, which was out in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, southwest of Philadelphia. And it was the only school I got into. It was an adequate school, but as I had said,
That was the only school you got into?
yeah, I was not a very good student.
Yeah.
So I started there, and after a year, it was very rural, and it was not for me. And I moved and transferred to Temple University.
Did you have any problem getting into Temple University?
I did not,
Why didn't you go there in the first place?
because I didn't want to go to a big city school.
Oh, okay. So you transferred to Temple University. What was your major?
My major was art history,
Okay.
and I became a really good student finally at Temple University. And I did very well there.
What do you mean real well? What kind of
I
grades?
was Dean's List all the time.
Uh-huh.
And hello Clancy. So I did well at Temple, and I was very interested in art history, and was able to secure a job at the Philadelphia Museum of Art as a volunteer. And
When you were in college?
Yes, when I was in college, and
Yeah.
I also worked in the bookstore there.
Uh-huh.
And when I graduated from college, I was offered a job at the museum, and I did their public relations work for a couple of years. Wrote their press releases and did publicity for them.
Did you like that?
I loved it. I really did.
So what else did you do in college? What else did you do at Temple other than go to school and
Well, I
work in the
went to-
bookstore?
I worked in this book. I worked in the museum shop and went to school, and was involved with protest marches for the civil rights movement.
Oh, you were?
Oh yeah,
How did-
I was a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
Oh, really?
And
How'd you get involved in that?
well, they were on campus. And Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, which was a fairly radical organization, although I didn't know that. I was just, because I had gone to a friend's school, it was a very liberal education. And the importance of social justice was taught there. And so moving into the working in the civil rights movement, to the extent that I didn't go to into the South like Rick did. Rick went took a summer and went down to the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, which is still functioning.
Yeah.
And he worked with some of the early colleagues of Martin Luther King Jr.
Really?
Yeah.
Did he meet Martin Luther King?
I don't think he did, but
Was he a lawyer when he did that?
He was in law school.
Wow.
He was in law
What
school.
did he ever talk about that?
Oh yes.
What did he say about that?
It was a good experience for him to. It was an important experience for him to do that, to do something hands-on.
So now you graduate from Temple.
So I graduated from Temple, and I applied to graduate school, and I'm accepted at the University of Pennsylvania and at Boston University.
In what?
In art history.
Yeah.
In Boston, I actually got a fellowship, but I got a boyfriend. And so I decided I wasn't going off to Boston. I went to the University of Pennsylvania and got married.
Did you, any of these protests or marches you were involved in, were any of them famous?
No,
Okay.
no. As a matter of fact, the most famous one I missed because I couldn't get home from California. I wanted to go to the March on Washington, and I was still in Seal Beach.
But you weren't in college at the time.
Yes, I was.
Oh, you were?
Yeah.
Well, I thought you came out here before college.
I came out before college, but the March on Washington was at the end of August, And I wasn't going back to Pennsylvania until the beginning of September, and I
Wow.
really wanted to go to that March on Washington.
So how'd you meet your boyfriend?
I was in history class, and he was in a history class that I was in. And so I had seen him in the history class, and then as I was driving into town one day, I saw him hitchhiking, and I picked him up. He was hitchhiking, and he was going to his job.
And what was his name?
His name was David.
Okay, so you met David.
I met David, and we were married rather quickly. We met in maybe January or February, and we were married in August.
And he was a student also.
He was a student. He was finishing up, and
He was finishing his undergraduate?
he was finishing his undergraduate degree,
And what was his major?
history.
Okay.
But the Vietnam War was looming, was there, and you could still get a deferment by being a public school teacher. And so he walked into the Board of Education of Philadelphia, and they gave him a job as a 6th grade teacher in a black school in West Philadelphia.
And was he done with college?
He was done with college.
And he got a job immediately as a teacher to
Immediately.
avoid going to the war.
And he made, I can still remember, he was hired at the rate of $5,600 a year, and we thought we were the richest people in the world.
And where were you doing? You're still in school?
I was then working at the art museum.
But you were getting a master's still?
No, I had dropped out of college, graduate school, because I realized I would not be a good academic. And so
Well, you were a good academic in college.
but not the same kind of academic you needed to be with a PhD.
Oh, you wanted to get a PhD?
Yeah, so I was happy working at the art museum, and then one day we decided that the city was noisy, and we borrowed a car and drove out to the country, and ended up renting a house in Quakertown, Pennsylvania, which is the upper end of Bucks County. And David continued to commute to Philadelphia, and I got a job on a local newspaper as a writer because I had experience writing press releases for
Right.
the museum.
What was the name of the newspaper?
The Quakertown Press. It was a daily newspaper, a small daily newspaper.
Okay.
And so we had this wonderful old farmhouse that was built in 1763, and it had amazing stone walls, and it was a really lovely, lovely old house that was a little gritty, but we were fine. And we became friends with a family who lived sort of across the hill, and they were Mennonites. And my husband became very intrigued at their lifestyle, which was a very tight family unit with everyone participating in the success of the farm. And so he decided that that's something he wanted to do, and he would, on weekends, get up at 4 and go over the hill and learn how to milk cows, and spend the day with Bob Gaiman, learning how to cultivate fields and grow corn and grow soybeans and become a farmer. And after a year, he said, this is what I really want to do. And I said, I don't want to do that. And then a year later, I said, okay. So after 3 years in Quakertown, we sold our house and bought a farmhouse with 120 acres north of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
How much was that? Do you remember how much you
It
paid?
was $100,000.
And how much did you pay for your house that you sold?
We had bought the house for $30,000. We sold it for $60,000. And we used that money as a down payment for the farmhouse and to buy a herd of dairy cows.
Okay, so you guys became dairy farmers.
We became dairy farmers, and we lived, the farm property had 2 houses attached. And the farmer continued to live in the main house, and we lived in the small attached house, which had no plumbing.
Why did the farmer stay on?
Because he was building his own house at the end of the farm. At the farm, he was taking 1 acre back of the 120, and he was building a little ranch house.
So while he was building that house, he lived in one
He
of
lived
the
in
properties.
in the main house, and we lived in the attached house, which No, it did have plumbing, it didn't have a bathroom. It had running water in the kitchen. And so we would take sponge baths in the kitchen, but we had to use the outhouse. And I was pregnant. And that was an adventure, using an outhouse in the middle of the night, in the winter.
Wow.
After eating pizza and being sick. And so I gave birth, and we had, by that time, the farm, we were almost ready to go into the big house. And 2 weeks after Sarah was born, we were able to move into the main house, which had a toilet in it.
So what were your main duties when you were, before Sarah was born on the farm, the dairy farm?
Well, my main duties continued. I took care of the young stock, the calves, did the feeding for the calves and the cows. And I had some field work responsibilities with the tractor and making hay.
What time did you guys get up in the morning to start working on the farm?
Typically, we were up at 4:30. We would milk the cows by 5. By 7, we were in the house having breakfast. 8:30, we would be out working again. I had the baby, I had Sarah in a playpen in those days, and so I could keep an eye, take her to the barn, put her in a playpen while I did the work in the barn.
So how'd you like living on a farm?
Well, I have mixed feelings about it. It was really it was a place where you were responsible for everything. You were responsible for all your successes, and you were responsible for all your failures. It was relentless work. There was never a moment off, and that was hard. It was very isolating, and of course I had two children that I was raising at the time. And
How far apart were they born?
2 years.
Uh-huh.
So we didn't have a day off in 10 years because you couldn't.
Not even like Sunday? You didn't take Sunday off?
Who was going to milk the cows?
Oh, okay.
We didn't do field work on Sunday, but we did milk the cows Sunday morning and Sunday evening. We didn't work during the day.
And was it successful, this farm?
We were able to feed ourselves and pay the mortgage. We never made any money, and really every time at Christmas we would say, "Are we going to make it another year? Are we going to make it?" And we would say, "Okay, this year we're gonna have a Christmas," and we would go out and chop down a tree. And make paper ornaments to put on the tree. And we'd say, okay, we can spend $10 total on gifts, because that's all we have. We ate all the food that we grew all the food that we ate. We ate our cows when they weren't making milk, and I had a vegetable garden and froze and canned 50 quarts of tomatoes and 50 boxes of green beans and peas and everything else that we ate.
How'd you learn how to do that?
I got a book. I got a book. And so it was a very, it was a challenging life. I have no regrets about it, but it was hard on me, and it was worse on the marriage, and it was not a good thing. So at some point, about 10 years into it, we had sold our cows, and I left David, and I took the kids, and I got an apartment in the city of Bethlehem.
Is that something you guys talked about before you did it? Or you just left?
We talked about it a little bit, but not much. I just told him it was a bad dynamic in our relationship. We were not a healthy couple.
Why?
He was a bully.
Yeah?
He was very strong. He was a bully, and I was weak. I became very weak.
Uh-huh.
And I couldn't protect myself. And the only way I could survive was to leave.
So you took the kids and left.
Took the kids and left.
And where'd you go?
I got an apartment in Bethlehem. At that point, they were enrolled in a small private school in Bethlehem, so we moved actually within walking distance of their school.
How'd you pay for the school?
They were on scholarship.
Okay.
They were on scholarship, and that's a funny story actually. Sarah was turning 5, and I knew she was very bright. We went to the kindergarten introduction program at the local elementary school, and the principal spent a lot of time there talking about how they bring the children up to grade level who were coming into the school. And I said to him afterward, I said, well, do you have anything for kids who might be above grade level? And he looked at me like I had 2 heads. The other thing about that community was that it had an anti-Semitism in it that was endemic. It was, for instance, people would say, don't bargain. The phrase, the concept of don't bargain him was don't Jew him down. And I didn't think that my kids needed to be in that environment.
Wait, where you'd moved to?
No, yes, where he had moved. We didn't think about the schools there. So, in other words, the next day after going to the school presentation, I called the local, one of the private elementary school. And I said, well, this is who we are. We live on a farm. Ooh, that's interesting, because most of their people were Iranian doctors and Indian doctors, and all the doctors sent their kids to this school. And he said, well, how much do you make? And I think that year our tax return showed maybe $7,000 or $8,000 of actual income.
Yeah.
I said about $8,000, and he said, I think your children need a different kind of educational institution. In other words, you can't afford this. So I said, oh, thank you we're coming out. We're going to go down for the meet and greet. So I went to this meet and greet at this, sort of fancy house, the farm wife. And the guy was the headmaster, this lovely man, and he was talking about this and that and that. And I said, he said, do you have any questions? And I said, do you think the children of a dairy farmer would be happy at this school? Could make friends? And he thought for a moment, and he said, they'd probably be the most popular students there. Well, in fact, when they were enrolled, we used to have the kids out for hay rides. These kids had never been to a dairy farm, and so my kids were
So
very
how'd you
fun.
get them into the school?
We applied, and they qualified, and we juggled.
Did they give them scholarships?
They gave them almost full scholarships,
Okay.
and so that's where they went. And
So what'd you do for a living?
I then worked at the local historical society with running the gift shop of the local historical society, and also doing some community service, education of preservation, concepts of preservation, community preservation.
Did you make enough money to survive?
Just sort of, a little bit.
Yeah.
And
Did
then
David help out?
David had to help out, but at that point, we had sold the cows, and we actually started marital therapy, and we got back together, and together we bought a house in Bethlehem.
Okay.
And we were in that house for a couple of years when the old patterns of our marriage
Came back.
but at that point, he fell in love with my best friend, and they were having an affair.
Who was your best friend?
Joan, he had an affair with Joan. Well, I guess it was more than an affair, because they ended up getting married.
Yeah.
So we got divorced, and that's when I started law school. So we had been in our house in Bethlehem a couple of years, and I had to decide what I was going to do with my life.
Right.
and I didn't want to manage a gift shop in my life, and I had always wanted to go to law school. So I took a LSAT prep course. Oh, there you go.
Keep going.
So I took an LSAT prep course, and I
Yeah.
took the LSATs, and I applied to Temple University, and I was accepted at law school.
How'd you do on the LSAT?
Well enough to get accepted to law school.
So you got into Temple Law School.
I got into Temple Law School, so I had to figure out how I was going to do this because we lived an hour an hour and a half from Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And so that fall, I was still married, and so I left the kids on Monday morning and went to school in Philadelphia, and then spent Monday night at my brother's house, and went to school from his house on Tuesday. Then on Tuesday night I would go back to Bethlehem, and Wednesday I would go back to Philadelphia and back to Bethlehem, and then Thursday I would go to Philadelphia and stay at Rick's house overnight and go to school. So I was Monday night and Thursday night I stayed overnight.
How old were the kids?
The kids were 10 and 12.
Who took care of them?
I hired a girl to come in after school and to cook them dinner, and David was there. I mean, so they were, you know.
You were still married?
I was still married. And then just before the first law school exams, which, as you know, are everything in law school, you only have one test, it's your final exam.
Right.
David said that he was leaving. I didn't know at the time that he was leaving to go with Joan. But he did, and we sort of worked out an arrangement where he would pay support and I would stay in the house. And at that point, then I had to hire somebody to really take care of the kids. But then the kids went to his house, his new apartment, when I went to Philadelphia. So they were at his house Monday and Thursday night, and it was complicated, but he took them to his house.
And how did you do your first year of law school?
How'd I do?
Yeah.
I made it. I made it.
Was it hard?
Well, I hadn't been in school in 25 years.
Right.
Yeah, so that part was hard. Law school, as you know, is kind of hard. The transportation was kind of hard. So I was a student at all times except for Sunday morning from 9 to noon. I said, I will be your mom. Sunday morning from 9 to noon, which I did, and I always made them waffles or something like that.
Did Rick help you with law school?
Rick helped me conceptually with law school.
What do you mean?
I mean, he helped me with try to understand the work and how to approach a case and.
No, I mean like classes. If you said I'm taking contracts.
Yes.
I'm having problems. Can you?
Probably, but you know, I had a couple of friends. I developed a study group, and I don't think I relied on him for that kind of thing.
And where was Rick working at the time? Was he in private practice?
He was in private practice. You know, I don't remember where he was working at the time. So I made it through.
3 years? Did you go 3 or 4 years?
I did it in 3 years. I said because I started when I was 40, and I
Right.
didn't want to be ancient by the time I finished. So I said, okay, I'm going to do it in 3 years. So the first summer, you know, I don't remember what I did in the first summer. The second summer, I did the summer school abroad. We had a program in Cork, Ireland, and I went there and took 6 weeks of school in Cork, and I had my kids with me.
Yeah.
And then
They were in Cork with you?
Yeah, they were in Cork with me, and because my sister-in-law had first cousins in Cork, and so we stayed with them, and then in my third year I worked at a law firm in Bethlehem, where I lived. So I graduated, and then I had a good clerkship, and then this law firm hired me.
Did you pass the bar the first time?
Very well.
Was it hard? Did you think it was hard?
Well, studying for it, making sure I continued to concentrate. Yeah, it was hard.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it was hard. But I did very well on the bar exam.
And then you got a job with the firm?
I was already working at the firm, and it was only a two-person firm, but it was a very well-known and well-respected group. The senior attorney is a guy named Bernie O'Hare, and Bernie was a legend in the trial in trial work. People would come and watch him do cross-examination of witnesses. He was also a legend in other ways in that he served in World War II with Kurt Vonnegut. And the book, Kurt Vonnegut's book, Slaughterhouse-Five, is dedicated to Bernie O'Hare and his wife Mary. And Bernie O'Hare is in this book. Well, Bernie unfortunately died of lung cancer. He was a miserable smoker. Kurt Vonnegut was at his funeral.
But did Bernie, what kind of law did he practice?
He did general law, and he did a lot of criminal defense work.
Okay. And then who was the other partner?
The other guy was a guy named George Heitzman, who was a well-known, very well-respected guy. So I learned from them, and what their protocol was, they put me right in the court. I didn't have to sit around writing pleadings. I didn't have to sit around having my scrutiny. They said, here's the file, go try the case. Trial by fire.
So you just started trying cases?
I got on the conflicts team for the criminal, for the public defender's office. So when there were two defendants, I got one of the defendants. And it was great practice. You know, you got into court immediately.
Do you remember any of your trials?
I do. I remember. I do. I remember one trial. I was going to get this woman off. She was accused of selling drugs, going into a luncheonette with drugs, and I can still remember we did the voir dire, and I picked the jury. It was noon. We took a break. 1 o'clock comes. She doesn't come back.
She failed to appear in the...
She failed to appear. She took off.
Did they complete the trial without her?
They absolutely did, because there's a case on point.
Right. They voluntarily abscond.
Yep, she voluntarily absconded. It only took them about 15 minutes, but it was I learned.
They were out for 15 minutes before they convicted her?
Yeah, I thought that was a victory.
Wow.
I had a couple of other cases that went to full verdict. I did some appeal work. I did some ineffective assistance of counsel work. So it was a small county and I got, very, very good experience very quickly.
And then what'd you do?
Well, then I decided it was time. I was invited by a colleague to start working with her together. We were two-person female. We were the only two-person female firm in the county. And we were together for a couple of years, and it was during that period that I really realized that in order to have a cash flow, I needed to have a practice that invited cash, and that was a domestic relations practice. So I was able to develop myself as a very well-respected, honorable domestic relations lawyer.
How did you learn domestic relations law?
Read the books, went to court, practiced.
So how long did you this firm that you formed with this woman, how
Yes.
long did that last?
That lasted about 3 years.
And then you went out on your own?
I went out on my own.
And then how long were you in practice before?
Oh, I was in practice myself for probably 10 years.
And then what happened?
And then I saw an ad and I was really doing very well. I was busy as I could be, making enough money to make a living. I saw an ad for the local court was going to start a family court sector.
Yeah.
Criminal court, civil court, family court. And I said, you know what? I would be good as a family court administrator. So I applied for the job, and I got the job. And so
Did the interview go well?
the interview went very, very well.
Did you know the people that interviewed you?
I knew I knew the court administrator. I was interviewed by the judges. I knew a couple of the judges. One of the questions that I really took me over the top was they asked me if I had ever worked with a group of people with different views. You know, like they were trying to get me to say whether I'd ever worked with judges, all of whom are your boss, you know? And I said, yes, I did work in a high conflict situation. I was the president of my synagogue board. And 3 of the judges were Jewish, and they all shook their heads. You know, they all knew.
That's a good answer.
I was the president of my synagogue board. So I got the job, and I started the family court, which involved custody, primarily the custody office, divorce, domestic violence, and domestic relations.
Were you a judge?
No, I was not a judge, but I was a hearing officer. Under the Pennsylvania rules, lawyers could become hearing officers and take testimony and make determinations on partial custody cases. 9 times out of 10, a case is a partial custody case. It has to do with the schedule. It's unusual when one parent is seeking primary custody over another parent. That's a different situation. So I did hear many cases on partial custody.
Did they have to stipulate to you?
No, by
Because you were a
rule.
hearing officer, did they have to agree to appear in front of you?
No, by rule, they had to appear in front of me. And then if they disagreed with my
Ruling.
order, they could take an appeal to a trial judge.
Did that happen very often?
No.
Did you ever get into it with any of the lawyers? Or
Yes.
have some, really?
Yes.
What really pissed you off about a lawyer?
What pissed me off when lawyers were interfering with settlement, because what we always did, we had a settlement conference first. And I settled 95% of my cases. I settled it because I listened to both sides, I acknowledged both sides, and I found something that they could live with. And the lawyers, who were paid to be advocates, were doing their job, and they were advocates, and they were pains in the ass. You don't want to agree to that. And I said, and I would ignore the lawyer, and I would just be looking at the client.
Oh, that's interesting.
So that was not only that, the other part of what happened in that job, well, 2 other things, was my ability to work with the judges and gain the trust of the judges. And so when they had custody trials, they would frequently call me, and we would talk through the circumstances of the case. And I would tell them about a new case that had come out, because in family law cases, the current law is like a moving target, not unlike criminal cases. It's a very fluid kind of law. So we would talk about cases, and I gained the trust of all of the judges, and they would seek my...
So how many years did you do that?
I did that for 10 years. But the most fun I had on that was I was member of the State Rules Committee that did family court rules. And so we would meet 4 times a year in Harrisburg at the Judicial Center and talk about the kinds of rules that needed to be implemented to normalize family practice across the state. Because in many states, the practice of law is organized from the top down. In Pennsylvania, we had counties that had their own little fiefdoms. And so there were rules in every county.
So you wanted some consistency.
We needed some consistency. My specialty was developing rules so that pro se litigants would have an even playing field. We had in our court system probably 70% if not 80% of family law cases were on unrepresented individuals. They just didn't hire lawyers. But they had to follow the rules. And so I developed for Pennsylvania the rules that pro se litigants had to follow, making them understandable and providing instructions for completing forms for them to use.
So you're saying most of your cases involve people that were pro per?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you had to settle those?
Yes.
Were those harder to settle than if they had lawyers?
I don't know if they were hard. It really depended on the circumstances. What we had was in custody cases, and this was custody cases. Very few of those a relatively small portion of those custody cases was parents, married people who had separated. What we had for the most part was unmarrieds. And so for some of them it was, we had a baby, now what do we do? They never lived together. They had an encounter and a child was produced.
Uh-huh.
And so that was a great deal of my work, was that kind of work.
And why'd you leave after 10 years?
Why did I do it? Oh, because I became old.
Well, how old were you when you retired?
70.
Wow, did you have to leave
I did not have to leave, but I was exhausted.
from doing that?
I was exhausted from doing that. I left. I made the decision to leave on the day when I got home and I was too tired to pick up my beer. And so I worked until I had a magic number coming with my pension.
Yeah.
And then
You only had 10 years,
I had 10 years.
which is the magic number?
That was for me. That was the most I could tolerate, much more work I could do. I needed to.
Did your pension vest after 5 or 10 years?
It vested after 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah, it vested after 5 years.
So you have that pension.
So I have that pension.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. So, yeah, I retired, and very shortly thereafter, I moved to Baltimore.
Okay.
And now spend my time playing golf, traveling, going to school, playing with my grandkids. I just took up horseback riding, and I do a lot of sewing. I made this.
You made that?
I made this, and I enjoy my life thoroughly, and can hope to for many years to come.
All right. Okay, now you moved to Baltimore. Tell me what it was like to move to Baltimore. Did you sell your house in Pennsylvania?
I did. I had no intention of moving to Baltimore. One day, probably about 6 months after I had retired, Rachel had come to had come to Bethlehem, and we were having coffee, and she said, "Mom, why don't you move to Baltimore?" And I said, "I can't do that. I have just retired and my whole life is here in Bethlehem. I simply can't." And she said, "Mom, I can use your help and you get to know the kids and it would be terrific." So I said, "Well, I'll come and visit for a weekend and we'll talk about it." So about 2 weeks later, I went down for the weekend and I looked around and I thought, this sort of makes sense. So that was mid-January, and by mid-April, I had gotten an apartment, sold my house, downsized everything, and packed up what was left and moved to Baltimore to
How'd you downsize?
I identified places that could use the kind of stuff that I had. So I loved power tools. I had a workbench and a lot of tools, and I thought to myself, well, who can use tools? And I decided to give everything to Habitat for Humanity. So that was good. And then I had couches, and I had beds, and I had dressers, and I had bookcases, and I just gave it all away. I didn't try to sell it. It was too much trouble.
How long did it take you to get rid of everything, would you say?
Probably 4 weeks.
That's pretty good.
Well, I was on a deadline.
So let's say we started 100%. When you moved, what percent was left? How much did you get rid of out of that 100%? 90%?
Well, I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment that had 1,100 square feet. I have since moved to a smaller apartment, but that apartment had 1,100 square feet, so that was a good size apartment. I actually had a bedroom and a den, so I was able to keep my main sofa, my bedroom. I got rid of my bedroom furniture because it was too big, and I kept a lot of stuff. But stuff I knew that I would never use, it was hard to get rid of because that was the stuff that had sentimental connection. So the Seder plate and my mother's dishes, I was never going to use them. So I took photographs of them so that if I needed to remember them, I could. And I gave them to Goodwill or Habitat for Humanity.
So you moved to Baltimore.
Yep.
And then what happens after you move?
Well, I settled in, and actually before I moved, I knew that I didn't want to be reliant on Rachel, my daughter, for a life. I knew that I had a responsibility for myself and for her to create my own community. Before I moved, I found that the local court had a CASA program, court-appointed special advocate program, and I arranged to sign up for the training for that. So I started that immediately when I moved. And in that program, I met a woman who was also being trained. She was a retired doctor, and we became friendly. And I said, I'd really like to learn to play Mahjong. And she said, I know somebody who teaches Mahjong. So by mid-August, I was involved in learning Mahjong and had been invited several times to a Mahjong group. And in that Mahjong group, somebody said, you would like Renaissance Institute. And I said, well, what's that? And she says, it's a senior education group with a wonderful social component. So she said, here's the catalog. And I looked at the catalog and I said, this is unbelievable. So I joined the Renaissance Institute. And for that winter, I played Mahjong and went to classes. And then in the spring, I said, I have these golf clubs. And if I don't use these golf clubs seriously, then I should get rid of them. They're just taking up space. So in the spring of the following year, I found a golf league and I joined a golf league. And I started to play golf at least once a week. So I had developed myself 3 really strong communities of Mahjong, golf, and Renaissance Institute. And I actually found time to spend with my family.
How'd you get involved how'd you find people to play golf with?
Well, I found the league at the local, at one of the local public courses. There was the Wednesday Women's League, and I signed up, and I'm in my 4th or 5th year there. Last year, I joined the local LPGA group, which gives me the opportunity to play at different courses, probably 3 days a week. If I want to, I can sign up for those, which I did last year. I played 3 times a week, 1 18-hole and 2 9-holes.
Has your golf game gotten any better?
Well, it absolutely has gotten better because when I started, I was shooting my driver about 80 yards and just so frustrated, and know that I was weak because I was like 78 years old. So I joined a local gym and I worked with a trainer who knew that my goal was to strengthen my body so that I could be a better golfer. And I've stayed with him for the last 2 years, and I work out 2 to 3 times a week.
So what exercises did he give you to help you become a better golfer, a stronger golfer?
My back and my shoulders, my torso, my core, and my legs.
And so he gave you like exercises to do?
Yes.
In the gym?
In the gym.
On machines?
On machines and with other kind of weights, free weights and so forth.
Did he specialize in golf, or was he just a trainer?
He was a trainer who plays golf.
Okay.
And so he knew what to do. And I took another specialized course with a guy who only does training for golf, and that was useful. So I have improved my golf game. And to the point where this year I've decided I'm going to try to qualify for the for the senior Olympics, which is in September.
In your age group.
In my age group. And my cousin, Jim Apple, who is a good golfer, mostly, had agreed to help me, and I am now at his house for a week of golf lessons, and I now know how to chip.
On your putting.
And my putting, I'm getting the idea of a feel for putting, not to sweep it across to the next hole. And we decided it's probably a good idea to work within my physical capabilities and not try to change my swing. But I have some things that I can do there.
You might get rid of the hybrids and add a 4 or 5 iron.
Yes, because I'm very happy with irons, and we'll see if that makes a difference.
And what's the key to chipping? What did you learn?
Well, I learned to stand with my feet together over the ball, keeping my hands together forward from the club face, and putting my weight primarily on my left side. Now, I did watch a video last night, and that guy on the YouTube talked about it more of a 60-40, and I have to rethink my instructions from Jim because I was really going more like 80-20 on the left side.
80-20. And what did we watch last night? What did we learn about the washing machine?
Well, we watched the most charming documentary on Rory McIlroy
on Amazon Prime.
On Amazon Prime, his search for the Masters. I forget what it's called, the Road to the Masters, something like that. Rory had, by the time he was, 19, won 3 out of the 4 majors. And for since 2014, he tried to win at Augusta, and he won last year, and it was really a wonderful, wonderful story about his journey there.
And when he was growing up, and when he was a young boy, how did he practice chipping?
He would stand in front of his mother's
washing machine,
and chip into the washing machine. He would use that as a target to chip into the washing machine. And so I am going to try to find I don't have the space to chip into my washing machine, but I think that if I use my living room chair as a target, that I can accomplish that. I can set up a bucket on my living room chair, and
you're talking major damage. You better you're going to lose your security deposit.
So that's my goal for golf. In 3 weeks, I will be leaving for Africa.
How many times have you been to Africa?
3 times. This will be my 4th.
And then where do you go after that?
Well, let me finish Africa, because we are going to be staying at an equine safari camp where I've been before but didn't have the courage to get on an equine. And so now I'm taking horseback riding lessons, and I'm intending to take a safari on a horse and hope to live to tell about it.
That's the real issue. That's another 60-40 proposition.
I got to be able to be on a horse so that horse can run like the wind and get away from whatever is chasing us.
So she's focused on the fastest horse possible.
The fastest horse possible.
Seabiscuit. But then after you come back, where are you going?
Well, then at the end of May, I'm going for 2 days in Amsterdam. Then we're picking up a Viking cruise ship and going up to Norway, up the west coast of Norway, up to Bergen. That's about an 8 or 9 day trip. And then from there, I'm flying to London to visit a couple of friends who live in London. I haven't been in London in many years. So that's my that. Then I will take the summer off from major travel, and in the fall, the end of August, I think it is, I'm going to Morocco for 10 days.
The rumor is that she's going to work her way to Iran and become the supreme leader.
That could be.
And Trump did not say that in his speech last
He
night.
did not.
But the rumor is it's going to happen.
It's quite possible. I have not been given the choice of wherever it is in South America, Venezuela or Tehran, but I have told Tehran is a very beautiful city. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens.
Okay.
So I turned 81 this summer. I turned 80 last summer, and my daughters gave me the most beautiful, wonderful party, and my family was there, my children and their spouses. They all came from various parts, and it was a lovely party, and I am grateful to have family. And this past Christmas, I made it to Seattle, Washington to visit Barbara Kovacic and her husband, and much to my surprise, my cousin Jim came there, and we had a fun few days. And as a result of that, I am visiting Jim now.
And so what was it like raising Sarah and Rachel? Did you have any trials or tribulations?
I had, I don't think so. They never got arrested. They never got in terrible automobile accidents that they didn't. Well, Rachel did, but she survived it just fine. It was that call that I remember one Sunday morning early. She called crying and said, "I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm okay." She had rolled the car, but she was okay. They have both given me unbelievable pride and joy. They are both successful human beings. They have picked wonderful partners and work very hard at what they do. They are smart. They are caring. They are good parents. They're good mothers. They're good spouses. They're good friends. I'm very lucky to be a part of their lives, and they don't need my money, which is even better. They can support themselves.
And that's critical.
Absolutely.
All right. Anything else you want to add?
I'm very happy to have done this. This is something that every family should do. And my thanks to Jim for thinking about it. And I will send this on in perpetuity.
All right. Thank you.